Welcome everybody. Hope everybody grabbed a cookie or a Rice Krispie treat on the little snack break there. Welcome to Cloud Native, Cloud First, and Hybrid. So different organizations and how they're approaching their cloud adoption. My name is Elizabeth Boudreau. I'm an executive advisor in Worldwide Public Sector Professional Services. And with me is my colleague Sterling Bean, also an executive advisor. And we'll introduce our three customers as they come up with their excellent stories. And what we're hoping that you learn from this session is how these three different models can work and what may work at your organization, because not all organizations are the same. Everybody does things a little different based on what you need. And so we want to give those different perspectives and how you can think about that. We'll describe the experiences and talk a little bit about what the decision process is in moving to the cloud. And with that, I'm going to have Sterling come up and just talk a little bit about the cloud adoption journey.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you here today. Sterling Bean, Executive Advisor with AWS. I want to talk briefly about a cloud adoption journey and how AWS views that. These are the common stages of adoption for cloud migration. These have been built out by AWS and our customers over the last several years, working with many, many migrations. And so as we see organizations progress along a time continuum with their adoption, we know that there are some common stages along the way, and if you'll notice, the vertical axis on this is value. So as time increases and you progress through the stages of adoption, the value to the organization and the constituents or customers that you serve also increases, and that moves from a project phase, where maybe some of you are right now, you're exploring your options, you're thinking about how cloud may benefit you and your operations, up through a foundation period, which is where you're starting to do some testing. You're putting some workloads, maybe some easy workloads to test into a cloud environment, seeing how those function, building some skills and some competencies and confidence among your development and ops teams. Full-blown migration is where you transition to putting some more of your very important workloads into the cloud. At this point, you're starting to explore migrating large workloads and entire data centers to the cloud. Your organization is maturing as far as cloud competencies go. And that can be done through a partner ecosystem, the AWS Professional Services, or some organizations who have the luxury of being able to do some of these things more on their own. Now, what does this look like from the perspective of a cloud-native environment versus an environment with lots of legacy IT? So we have two different continuums here. As you see, as you might expect, the lower line of this graph shows that with legacy IT, and when you're dealing with legacy applications and legacy systems and migrating those to cloud, there's a lot more work and planning that has to be done to get those systems cloud ready. So as we see, you might expect you progress more slowly through the stages of adoption, so your value realization takes a little bit longer. But ultimately the end goal is working in an optimized state in the cloud. Now, as we see with a more cloud-native environment, as you might expect, that value curve is much steeper because you have applications that are cloud ready from the beginning or a very minor lift to get those into the cloud. They're already optimized to run in a cloud environment so that you can take advantage of cost savings and performance that's native to the cloud. AWS has a project management framework. Has anybody heard of the CAF out in the audience today? A few? The CAF is the Cloud Adoption Framework, and what that is, it's a project planning framework that has also been developed by working with our customers at AWS over the years. It's divided into 6 different perspectives. Each one of these perspectives gives detailed guidance on how an organization can handle and manage that change during a cloud migration. These are divided, and the reason you see the 2 colors represented here, 3 perspectives that deal with more of the business functions of the cloud, and then 3 perspectives that deal more with the technical or operations function of a cloud migration. So as we look at business, people, and governance, those are the ones that you need to really do as a foundational exercise to make sure that you're properly budgeting, that you have a skills assessment, that you know how you're going to utilize your people to make the transition, and that you have a governance model established. Then as you progress more into the technical aspects, we look at platform security and operations so that we're doing a detailed technical assessment. The CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework, is something that's freely available to you online. I encourage you to go out and take a look at it. And feel free to use that or talk to someone, one of your AWS account manager or one of your AWS partners if you wish to explore that even further. But it provides you a great framework for beginning to look at your cloud journey. All right, now I'd like to turn it over to Brett Dennis from Helio Campus to talk about Helio Campus Cloud Journey and how it impacted their organization.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks, Sterling. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brett Dennis, and I'm with Helio Campus. Do we have anybody in the room who's from a higher education institution? Could you raise your hand? So a few. So when I start talking about provost and institutional research, a few of you will get what I mean, which is good. So Helio Campus is an analytics company. We provide data services and data analysis and predictive modeling services exclusively to higher education institutions in the United States. And the interesting thing about us is that we are actually built inside the University System of Maryland. So in 2011, our CEO, Darren Catalano, was hired to build a team within the University of Maryland, University College specifically. And the idea was to evolve the team that was in the existing institutional research team. And that is the group typically that is providing reporting to different stakeholders around campuses. So whether it's an enrollment or admissions or retention, those teams are typically responsible for providing reporting to leadership around campus. And the idea was for this team was to evolve that model to allow higher value analysis of those teams. So if they wanted to use data that they had with source systems on campus and make that accessible to more stakeholders across campus, so to really make the idea of how we're providing reporting and analytical insights and dashboarding and visualizations a more efficient process in the university. So over time, as the platform evolved, we began to realize that the key to this is really providing the analysis and the data science services to the stakeholders, but we really needed an efficient way to deliver that. So we needed a platform that would enable us to deliver that. So Amazon Web Services is a key piece of that, and as we evolved through time, the University System of Maryland took notice of what we were doing inside the university and said, gosh, you know, we love what you're doing. Why don't we give you some funding, some seed funding? We'll commercialize it. We'll make a company out of it called Helio Campus, and you take it out to other institutions beyond the University System of Maryland. So that's how we were created, and I'll talk a little bit more about the data modeling and how we got there. But when I think about the services strategy, and as we thought about, well, if we were to take this model and to deliver it to other institutions and other campuses around the country, what kind of platform would we need to do that? How would we ultimately deliver that value? And so we think about how we created the model using Amazon Web Services and using best-of-breed technologies. We wanted to preserve how we delivered that value at Maryland. We wanted to preserve that model as well as the platform and be able to replicate that out to other universities. So that was a big part of it, and also how we determined the type of architecture that we would use. And ultimately, we thought about what kind of value are we delivering to our universities today, and how do we make that repeatable? So we know that every institution and every campus says they're going to be a little bit different in terms of the source data systems that they have, in terms of the challenges that they're facing, whether it's retention or managing financial aid, or whether it's admissions or recruiting their students in the right way for them. So we wanted to make sure that we understand these key challenges and having an architecture that would help us solve those. So here's a very general diagram of what our architecture looks like, and it really starts with, we call it an analysis agenda, where we want to understand what are those challenges that you're trying to solve. And the way that we approach that is that we replicate source data systems inside Amazon Web Services. We use the Redshift data warehouse environment. And then we also load on the end where you see data visualizations, we load the BI tools directly into Amazon Web Services as well. So we have a secure platform that's performant, that we're able to ingest any number of data sources regardless of what the source is, whether it's an on-premise or another cloud system. And the idea is that we have a central point of truth. We have a central repository where we're able to centralize all of the data so that whether we're bringing in existing source systems, so student information systems, or ERPs that it's called in the business world, PeopleSoft, a Lucian colleague, a Lucian Banner, whether it's CRM data from maybe a Salesforce for recruiting information, whether it's learning management system data from maybe a Blackboard or an Instructure Canvas or a D2L, we want to make sure that depending on the kinds of challenges that the institutions are facing, that we have all the data in one place. The important part of what Helio Campus really provides to me is this center section is that we're building out the data models, and we're building out a flattened structure so that if we have enrollment data or if we have admissions data, then that's structured in such a way that users that are looking at specific questions around those content areas or subject areas That's what Heliocampus brings. So we wanted to focus our expertise on building out those data models in a way that ultimately users would be able to benefit from. We did not want to put emphasis on building out a new platform or building out our own BI tool. Again, another reason why we chose Amazon Web Services to provide that for us. And it's been an important part of our story and certainly important to how we're delivering value. Some of the benefits that I think are important when I think about what institutions ask us. So when we're talking, the same decision process that we used in terms of how we built out the platform of how it would be used at Maryland, the same kind of questions come up, whether it's a secure environment, whether it's a performant environment, whether it's an extensible environment that can bring in any data source regardless of what it is. So we wanted to preserve that model so that we're delivering the same value out to other institutions, that we were able to prove the model that worked and provide value inside the University System of Maryland. Competition's an interesting thing for us. You know, when we feel like we're rather unique in how we deliver value, and I use this as just one example because I think in many cases we hear that, oh, well, we can do this ourselves. We don't need Heliocampus. We can put all the pieces together. And it's really, to me, it's about the time and the expense and about the teams that would need to be put together to actually build this out. For Heliocampus to be created, we started in 2011. We released it in 2016. So it takes quite a bit of time to do that. The last thing I'll close on here is just talk a little bit about end user goals. We always begin with an end in mind, and we always begin with who actually has the questions that we're trying to help address. And when I think of personas that we're dealing with, you know, I think about, for example, financial officers or provosts or enrollment managers. And so these are examples of visualizations that we would actually deliver out to institutions. And we always start with this analysis agenda to understand, is it really financial questions that the institution is trying to understand? You know, what are our costs by program or by department, or even down to the course or to the instructor level? Or is it a provost example from a retention? Do we have certain subsections of students or demographics of students that are struggling, and can we identify them early and get them back on track with the right programs? Or if you think about from an enrollment perspective, are we providing financial aid to the right students? Are we providing the right amount of financial aid to students that are ultimately going to be successful at our institution? And if so, can we understand what those trends and patterns and correlations are? And part of what Heliocampus likes to do is to create visualizations and dashboards and ultimately apply data science and analysis over top of that to provide these kind of actionable insights. And the platform is a key piece of that, and I think that we've had great success with the AWS team over time. So that's my story. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Ryan. Up next, we've got Ryan Frazier from Harvard Business School with a story on being cloud first.
Great. So talk a little bit about a couple of journeys that we've had at Harvard, and I come with it from a couple of different perspectives. From about 2012, kind of before that, 2011 to 2015, I worked within the central administrative, kind of central IT department of Harvard, where I did a lot of the work kind of setting up and initiating some of the early work with how do you start the enterprise adoption story at a place like Harvard, at an institution. More recently, in the last 18 months or so, I've been over at Harvard Business School, where I've been part of HBX, which is Harvard Business School's digital education initiative, which runs entirely in the cloud and presents a very different kind of perspective. So I think it's kind of an interesting set of things that I hope to share with you today about kind of views from both sides of this. So if we look at cloud at Harvard, and I think this very much maps to the earlier adoption curve that Sterling was sharing in terms of kind of how this came about. So pre-2013, there was a lot of kind of, experimenting on the edge, I would say, kind of probably similar to kind of what other people would find as well, where kind of pockets, especially in an education institution, we have researchers, they're very much on the cutting edge. I think you'll find one of the earliest case studies on Amazon Web Services was from the Harvard Medical School and some work that they had done there in the research area. There are a few other kind of little pockets here and there, but sort of nothing that was particularly coordinated. In late 2012 and early 2013 is when we started to have early engagement and conversations about sort of, okay, this cloud thing seems to be coming. We had started some initiatives internally that at that time were looking more at the private cloud, and we're having a hard time figuring out the use cases and getting the hardware and building all of that up. And we didn't have those competencies, and one of our technical advisors said, well, why don't we just go try some of this stuff on Amazon while we figure it out? So that really kind of started what's been a really exciting journey here. And sort of those early times really were about sort of kind of exploring and learning, focusing on the education of our staff. We had sort of monthly sessions about, from Amazon about, you know, how to use EC2 and how to launch these instances. We started working on a lot of the questions about networking. We brought in some teams to kind of have little communities of practice to start experimenting and building up design patterns that we could use. And all of that really led up to in 2016 when sort of the acceleration and kind of this became sort of a larger program and growing. In fact, kind of in 2014, in the middle of that alignment phase, was when our CIO announced at our annual Hewitt meeting, Harvard IT, that sort of we were going to be 75% to the cloud in 3 years. While the pace of that's been a little bit slower, I think that was an absolutely critical move in terms of being the catalyst for kind of taking us forward and showing that, yes, this is the direction we're going, and this is where we're heading, and getting everyone to start kind of at least walking in that direction. So that kind of when we get to 2016, that effort has really kind of started to go, and I think it was about February of this year within Central IT where they announced that they would be provisioning no new VMs within the data center, and there was a target to shut down the data center by 2018. Now, Harvard's is a big place, so that's not necessarily all of Harvard, but it's certainly kind of the core and the main component of that. In terms of kind of why we did this, you know, we kind of put together a whole bunch of things here. I think that this is a sort of take your pick of it. I'd kind of encourage people, if you can, to kind of find a couple of these to sort of anchor on and really focus your initiatives around those types of things. This is a bit of motherhood and apple pie of cloud adoption. But I think kind of it shows that there's a lot of really compelling reasons out there for why you would go to the cloud and look to do that. Now, HBX will kind of pivot a little bit here to talk about HBX. We'll call it a cloud case study. If you know anything about Harvard Business School, you know it's dedicated to the case method and using examples to kind of teach. So kind of one of the key questions at HBS, as a lot of the kind of MOOCs, the massive open online classrooms were developing, kind of these big things like Coursera and edX, was kind of how does that fit into what the business school is doing? If you've ever been to the business school campus, it's all filled with these horseshoe-style classrooms. It's all about sort of discussion and conversation, faculty members kind of figuring out how to draw out the students in these conversations, which is not really kind of an easy model to sort of intuitively figure out how do you map that into an educational experience online. So this was kind of the key question of, can you even do it? And there was a lot of doubt. Out of that kind of came this initiative to build HBX, and it started as actually sort of because of this desire to create a particular experience, we built our own platform from scratch. So we didn't kind of start off with Coursera, we didn't take the edX, we actually kind of got a bunch of developers and we started building this entire system ourselves so that we could really tailor it to the pedagogical methods that the business school uses in their teaching. And sort of out of that, we've generated a number of very exciting classes. I encourage everyone to look at these. A lot of these are great for technical people as well, and kind of trying to create this online experience that would actually be something that sort of maps to that business school. Couple platforms that we have, just kind of the online program that I mentioned, which runs entirely in Amazon Web Services, and we also have this very large global classroom, we call it, that does 60 simultaneous sessions with participants around the world. This is not currently on Amazon, although that's something I would love to figure out how to make that happen. So kind of when we looked at this in terms of kind of like, you know, what are the technology principles and kind of what are we looking for when we launch this new initiative, the business school? So the first prerogative was to move fast. We needed to make this happen. There were kind of windows of opportunity to see if this would work, and this was sort of highly valued to go as soon as you could. We wanted to run independent of the main campus IT, so this is Harvard Business School has its own fairly large IT organization, which is itself independent from the central campus IT organization I was talking about earlier. But in order to be able to go fast, in order to be able to innovate, we were allowed to sort of say, start wherever you want, do your own technology, figure out what works. And then finally, we needed an environment that would allow us to sort of scale up or scale down. If this was kind of turned out to not work, and we found out that, nope, this is a bit of a bust, we didn't want to have closets and racks of equipment that we didn't need. And if it was amazingly successful, we wanted to make sure that we had sort of a path forward where we could scale this up. So if you look at all of these are obviously, if you're here, these are kind of classic cases for kind of why you would use the cloud. And so kind of off to the cloud we went, and so this became kind of born essentially sort of a native cloud adoption within sort of a larger cloud-first strategy that was going on. Kind of last little slide here as we talk about kind of where we are in this larger journey. As one of the early adopters of cloud within Harvard, we've kind of been able to progress through a lot of those stages of kind of building it up, of enabling it, and we're actually sort of moving into this optimization phase within the environment. And I think this is a graph I've seen kind of in other places as well, kind of other people adopting cloud where, a lot of times you kind of start off and as you're getting out there, you're getting your kind of arms around how do I manage this and how does it work and that. And so there's kind of some early growth and then kind of some periodic optimization that you do, and then kind of entering into a period where you're truly kind of actually starting to understand kind of how does the cloud run, how does it work, and trying to do that optimization of things. I show the graph on the right there just because I think kind of one of the interesting things about Amazon is people get worried about different elements of the cost and kind of what's going to cost me a lot, and I think network is often one of the big concern areas, and you see data transfer lies down there almost in the noise of all of this. With Amazon, there's only a few things that really drive your cost, and I think that's an important thing to remember as you go forward. But I think kind of stepping back from this a little bit kind of from the specifics of these examples, I think there's a couple of interesting things that kind of come out about this. And I think this is really, as we get kind of into the area where going off to the cloud is not a crazy idea, as the 10,000 or so people that I hear are here today represent, and all the people at reInvent, that when you look at this, kind of there are lots of different patterns of adoption that you'll find even within a single organization. And so kind of, we have our larger sort of enterprise strategy that covers a particular area, which was very much kind of this cloud-first strategy that followed that classic adoption curve earlier. We have kind of pockets of essentially sort of what look like a born in the cloud, cloud-native efforts that go on. And kind of within this, we'll also find kind of a lot of what's happening within Central Campus is also building up sort of the networking configuration and direct connect peering and some other things to enable sort of secure connections back to campus that have that hybrid view. So a lot of this, I think, is kind of, as you think about this, realize that A, there's lots of variation kind of between different companies, but I think kind of what you'll also find is within any organization, especially any large organization, that you're going to have lots of different patterns within there in different ways that you can adapt. And I think in some ways that can be a tough transition for people who are used to kind of more homogeneous IT, but there's a lot of power in the cloud and the flexibility that it offers in being able to kind of tailor to different parts of your business and sort of kind of go at the pace there that helps sort of meet whatever the particular business needs that you have. And so I think really focusing and taking the time to understand what are my driving cost concerns, what am I trying to do, how am I going to be successful here, and then take what's out there and take the experience of other and take the experience of the Amazon team to really kind of figure out how do I map that to what my needs are. And I think that's, I think the good thing about being where you're at if you're an early adopter is a lot of people have kind of tread the path before you, and so I think there's a lot of really good lessons out there to be learned. And happy to answer more questions later as well if you're looking for more of that. Cool.
Thank you, Ryan. So next we've got Craig Fox, and he's going to bring a really different perspective and comes from a government agency and talk about hybrid models.
Cool. Good afternoon, everybody. Craig Fox. My middle name is Anthony, so the Cloud Adoption Framework was clearly named after my initials, which I didn't know before. I had no idea what the bloody Cloud Adoption Framework was until the account team told me that I knew about that. So Okay, let's get cracking. I've got a big red clock here that says we're 25 minutes and 31 seconds away from a drink. So the more excited you get, the more I will shorten that time. And the longer that you take or the more sad you get, I'll make sure we go for the full 25 minutes, which will stop us from getting from a drink. And I wanted to start, if I could, with just a quick message from my CEO, who's our Commissioner of Taxation. His name is Chris Jordan, and he wanted me to pass on to the audience this afternoon. If you are unhappy with the IRS, we are happy for you to choose us as your taxation officer of choice. Seriously, if you are unhappy, come on board the ATO train. So that joke works in 2 countries. That's fantastic. And for the Australians down the front who are playing on their mobile phones, I'm going to download an app that gets your tax file number, and you will have a significantly increased tax bill next year. So. What I wanted to talk about this afternoon a little bit is the ATO's journey to the cloud. It's probably less about cloud native, far more about trying to get towards a hybrid IT operation. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the cloud journey. What's been really interesting is that the notion of how we've had to go through that cloud adoption framework, particularly about the levels that you go through getting towards that optimisation stage, and also focusing very much on the left-hand side first, which is around the governance, et cetera, has really proven to be the kind of way in which we've tackled that journey. So I'll share for the next 5 or 10 minutes a little bit about what we've done. As you can imagine with the tax office, the notion of going to cloud, and our cloud journey started in about 2015, is one that isn't easy for a government agency to be able to undertake, particularly when you start thinking about the protection of client data. But interestingly enough, the tax office, particularly on the Australian government scene, is leading the way with cloud. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the circumstances that we found ourselves in and some of the things that we've done over the last 2.5 to 3 years that have helped us become, from our perspective, one of the leaders of cloud across federal governments. Just a little bit about, I've only got 3 slides, and I'll hope in some way or shape or form that the next 5 or 10 minutes resembles them in some way. But a little bit about the ATO. We are what I would consider to be a traditional IT organisation. And we're still very much working with a lot of our IT in that traditional mode. We've got a large managed outsourced arrangements. We work with 3 key providers, and I think I put them all up on the whiteboard I did. So Hewlett-Packard are our mainframe, our data storage, our data centre managed service. We work with Leidos, who are on the right-hand side, particularly around desktop. Leidos also manage our help desk for us, and Optus is our telco carrier. So we're very much a traditional IT, all on-premise infrastructure, managed by partners, but by and large still as if they were our assets. So I always sit there and think they're as much our data centres as they would be HPE's. That's been our model. We've been outsourced in the ATO for about 17 or 18 years now. Okay? Now, by and large, our driver to the cloud started with one key journey, one key lesson, and that was all about economics. So it's late 2015. We've got a pretty good handle on how much we think our sustainment costs to run our IT platform would be across those 3 vendors. And about late 2015, we started to project what our funding would look like in 2016, 2017, 2018, and our executive realised that we just couldn't afford to keep investing in our traditional IT to the way in which we were. No one was overly unhappy with the level of service, okay? So nothing was particularly broken. We weren't unhappy with any of our vendors in any way, shape or form, but we knew looking ahead, we just couldn't sustain that level of investment. And funnily enough, everybody in our organisation wanted us to make the move to cloud, except nobody had any idea about what that meant. Okay, so for us, often talked about what was it that got us started on our cloud journey, and our first one was all about economics. And I'm not sure what the American landscape is, but in the Australian landscape back in late 2015, there were these ridiculous notions that you could save 150% of your current infrastructure budget if you went from on-premise infrastructure to the cloud. Okay, so for us, all about the economics. I really like the previous point. It's definitely one of the drivers. But funnily enough, as time has gone on, we've found it to be less important as a driver, but it was certainly very, very important to get started. I find execs are really focused on money. So if you have got that driver around cost optimisation, if you are worried about how you're going to sustain your investment in your IT platforms, it's a really good way to get started. Second step for us, so we're now talking about early 2016, we come up with the notion of, so what would the ATO's hybrid cloud ecosystem look like? I've got drivers, objectives, the enablers and the benefits, which are very similar and aligned to what's been presented before. But we came up with what we call our vision for what the future looked like. I would highlight the time frame, it's 2016, so it's kind of thinking that we've moved on from, but this became the vision of how we wanted to operate. We call it the purple horseshoe diagram. I think we were really big into prints at the time, and so we come up with the notion that it had to be purple. Some people are nodding their heads. I have absolutely no idea why it's a horseshoe, but we've called it the purple horseshoe. And a quick show of hands, is anybody from Accenture here? Cool. If you've seen this resold by a major consulting company, then you know where it started from. So, but I'm only joking, we love Accenture. But this is what started it for us. So we actually published this vision. We put this vision up on every wall across our IT organisation, and we also made sure that any vendor who was working with the ATO or wanted to work with the ATO was able to come and have a conversation with us about this. And I particularly want to draw just a couple of points about where we went to next in our cloud journey. And some of those terms are really quite basic. If you think back about early 2016, public cloud, virtual private cloud, we were also talking then about a community cloud. I heard with interest this morning about your government cloud. So the terms are, I acknowledge, quite simplistic and quite basic. But the only question that we asked anybody was, does anybody disagree that if you're setting up a hybrid IT environment for the future, that those elements would be there? And we couldn't find anybody that disagreed. So instantly, by starting to talk about if you were planning for the ATO of 2017 or 2018, do you agree that public cloud, which was the term that we were using at that time, do you think that would form part of the way in which we would do business? And everybody did. Okay? So the second part of our journey was really about sharing our vision, making it clear that we weren't that worried about the way in which we were operating right now, because we weren't being critical of the past, but we were being quite open about the future, that this is the way in which we thought it should operate. So from my point of view, if you're going on a cloud journey, and we are and have been we're under contract every step of the way. So that's why I was really keen to mention the point earlier. We've got contractual obligations with HPE, contractual obligations with Leidos, the same with Optus. So we acknowledged that we were under contract in partnership, but we challenged our partners about whether or not they could work along this kind of framework. And interestingly enough, everybody agreed that we should have it. Nobody agreed that we should change though. So in terms of our cloud adoption framework, we had to spend a lot of time educating our partners, particularly our existing partners, about the way in which we wanted to work differently. But we also had to make sure that we were prepared to open ourselves up to a dialogue with new partners who thought that they had a value proposition that could fit this vision. Now, I realise we're all at an AWS gig, but the organisation that stands head and shoulders above anybody else for helping us understand where that value proposition was is AWS. And funnily enough, the very first time that I met with AWS, while they were very excited to meet me, as you can imagine, they were beside themselves, they actually really challenged me and said, we would love to work with you, Craig, but no federal government has been able to find a way to work with the cloud so far. So interestingly, by going down that AWS path, it wasn't about, we would love your business, come and work with us. It actually challenged us to understand how our own organisation needed to change. And I think in terms of your cloud adoption framework, that's one of the really important journeys. You've got to understand all the areas of your business that while they might want to go to cloud, aren't quite sure how to get to cloud. And I think Ian this morning talked about the ministry of no. There'll be a lot of that in your organisation. A lot of that will be if you are currently working with partners, with your existing partners. We found the vision really changed things. And I've pressed the right slide. This is kind of now where we're going. I just want to cut a little bit though before this. In terms of our cloud adoption, and it's a really good slide, that earlier one, we started really simply, infrastructure as a service. So for us, we didn't worry too much about production workloads. We certainly didn't worry about protected data. So all of our protected client data stays on our on-premise solution, but we started really strongly in terms of how do we actually shift our organisation down that cloud pathway. We started infrastructure as a service. And I think Werner mentioned this morning about the importance of development and test. We started infrastructure as a service, development and test levels. The next important thing that happened about our cloud journey was our people were beside themselves. So all of our developers who'd been working on on-premise infrastructure, who had frustration around cycle times, who had frustration around infrastructure provisioning, particularly with our managed service providers. All of our people who we opened up a portal so that they could self-serve their infrastructure needs through our AWS relationship. All of a sudden, all of our staff were thinking to themselves how fantastic it is to work in a progressive IT organisation. So the groundswell of yes really started from our own people, and getting our own people really excited was by opening up infrastructure as a service opportunities. For us though, that was just the first step. The next step then for us is really then starting to work about how we could take some mission critical applications to the cloud. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow, but that was our next step. So in terms of how we took those steps towards getting to cloud, started at infrastructure, then we started thinking about applications. We're very big on orchestration and standardization. So we introduced an orchestration tool, again, to start to drive the notion that we wanted portability in our business, was one of the drivers on the previous slide. So we started building out an orchestration and governance capability, including people, including process, and including technology. And really from that point of view, it became less about the move to cloud and actually became one about we just work in the cloud now. And that whole dialogue in the ATO has shifted. It's no longer the worry about how you get to cloud. It's now an acknowledgement about the fact that cloud is just part of how you do business. And that kind of leads us to the last slide. And this is really now where, and again, there's been some references about this in the earlier presentations, we're extremely focused on improving the ATO client experience, and we're also extremely focused on improving the ATO business experience. And these are the measures that we're finding right now. If you're asked to deliver IT services on behalf of your organisation, and you want those services to drive client experiences and business outcomes, we're focusing really strongly on availability, resilience and scale, and then agility and still cost efficiency. These are the new drivers. Particularly for us in the federal government of Australia, we need to be connected across our government colleagues. We're getting a really strong mandate now for that to be available 24/7, which is an extremely challenging thing to do in a traditional IT environment. For us going forward about the cloud journey, these are the outcomes that we need to achieve, particularly from our IT platforms. We want those to then drive the kind of client experiences that we're talking about, and we see real opportunity of being able to do that successfully by going all in on cloud. Now, interestingly for us about going all in on cloud, we've kind of reached that point, and I might just, if I could, show my skills by going backwards, which allows you to sit back and think, he's going back to the start to kill another 15 minutes before we can have a drink, but he's not. He's just really working this through beautifully, going back to this point of view. Right, got there eventually. Yeah, retired technical debt, that would be good. We're kind of really right now at the migration level, okay? And having what we think has built some really strong foundations about the way in which a cloud business runs. I think we're going to go backwards for a little while because now we understand the full scale and the full size of what it will take to optimise. So we're certainly talking about going from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service, but we now understand to take all of our business to get truly 24/7 operations, the size of that ask is far greater than what we originally thought it was. So my counsel to anybody on that cloud journey would be, I agree that if you take a cloud native approach, you will be far more on the left-hand side than the right-hand side of those two lines. But it's probably a really good idea to pause when you get to that migration optimization lens and have a think about all the work that you need to do. It will cover security, it will cover data standards, it will cover application re-architecture. I think you'll change the roles inside your organisation. All of those things need to be thought about. So if you're looking for a logical point where we are right now, that's as really good a time as any. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for not throwing empty beer cans at me. That's always a really good thing in Australia. And enjoy the rest of the conference.
So if you've enjoyed Craig, you can hear more from him at Keynote tomorrow with Teresa, so you'll get a little more of his wonderful story.
Or you can have 10 minutes off because it's the same story. It's up to you. I think Teresa will note if you leave, though. That won't be good.
You summarized perfectly going into my next slide, and that's what are some of these elements of a successful journey. And we heard about it before, a CIO saying, we're going in, but there needs to be more than that. It's really about an executive sponsorship. It's not just a statement, but it's involvement. It's really getting all of your executives on board. Because not only is the CIO leading it, but you need to get your business behind it. The goal here is IT to become the enabler and not the no. So make sure you're talking to your CEO, your CIOs, your CFOs, who are holding those purse strings that can really help you move forward. We talked about a cloud-first strategy. Create what's the right vision for you. Because as we heard, there's 3 very different perspectives here, and everybody's going to have something different. So find what's best for you and your organization, and then incentivize people to come along on this journey. Because as we said, it truly is a journey. It's going to change things. It's not a new server type. It's really a new way to do business. Experiment. I come from the world of healthcare, and genomics is one of our favorite places to experiment. You can do a big workload and shut it all down and be done in a day versus waiting maybe an 18-month cycle to get a server. And as we saw with HBX, if it doesn't work, you want to be able to get rid of it quickly too. But when it goes great, you really want to scale up fast. So do that experiment, try things out, have new ideas, see what else you can do within your organization. As you start to move forward, think about those principles and standards. There's lots of compliance out there, and AWS is here to help you meet those compliance. So make sure that those standards and definitions within your organization are baked in, just like AWS is going to help you bake in that security to keep you moving forward so you don't get tripped up later on down. As you move forward, you're going to get new people on, try this thing, and that team's doing that. This idea of this cloud center of excellence, where you can have that tiger team, that SWAT team who can go in and help different parts of your organization move forward. It's really important and really can help drive further adoption within the organization. And as we've seen across all of them, organizations will change. So as you think about the change, think about roles. And in government agencies, job descriptions sometimes are a hard thing to change. So let's think about that up front. Let's plan for it. How can we help transform the organization to be that next level, but still maintain and supplement and train your own workforce? We're not saying you need a new one. Let's help who you have. Let's build people's skills up. Let's mentor them and train them so that they can learn all types of new activities. And finally, we have a roadmap. You're going to start small. You're going to do that project. Maybe you start that foundation and migration, but just keep iterating. Take what you know, what you've learned, and build on it, because there's just more and more coming forward. And as you learn, change your plan. That's okay. That's part of the iteration. So Sterling and I come from professional services. One of the things we like to say is we've been there as AWS. We've helped these organizations. We can help you too. I come from a customer organization where I use professional services to build my organization. So I'm a customer believer now on the AWS side. But we can build in those best practices. We have assets to help. There's quick starts. There's so much published out on the website and widely available for everybody. But as you know, we iterate and we develop fast. We've put over 1,000 services out last year and new features, and it's hard to keep up. So we keep our team updated to help keep your team updated. And finally, learn from our battle scars so you don't have to repeat. You can learn from those. Be the best for your organization. And our number continues to grow, that we have over 31,000 public sector customers on AWS. So with that, I want to say thank you. We actually have a couple of minutes. If anybody has any questions, we have quite the crowd in the room. I think we've got a mic. Do you want to be my runner? If there's anybody who has a question, feel free to raise your hand. Sterling's got a mic, and we'll go, I think, right in the center. Gentleman right in the center on the aisle.
So as we heard in a couple of scenarios, cost is a big driver for cloud adoption or getting onto the cloud. So how have you been able to do some kind of cost analysis in order to convince executives to move into the cloud and help them understand that there are cost savings? Because I think that's the first step, and then the speed becomes the more important part. So anything that you could share would be helpful.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd say. Cost kind of gets you started, which is really good. And there's, luckily enough, when we started, there was enough kind of executive confidence that it would save money that we were able to get started. So there's just a bit of uniqueness about the kind of that 2015 period where certainly on our continent, most people wanted to go to cloud because they understood the economics. Interestingly enough, we've done some very detailed ROIs. So we've actually tracked what it would take, for example, from a single point infrastructure provisioning through to a project run with whatever the infrastructure requirements could be at the IaaS level. And we've been able to show point solution to point solution that moving to cloud does provide some economic benefits, and we've been able to articulate those. A couple of interesting points again for us. It does require an investment in cloud up front. So you've got to build your cloud capability. You've got to do some work around your cloud platform. So if I was going back in time right now, I would certainly be talking about the ability to be able to save money by demonstrated ROI. But I would also acknowledge that it requires some investment funding up front. And the other really important part that we've learned, particularly if you have a look at our model, the ROI on cloud is only fully achieved when you turn something else off. So for us, we're able to show that, and we kind of did something like this would be the invoice for that project if it's running on AWS. This would be the invoice if that project was running on our managed service provider, and that's been able to demonstrate the savings. But the real ROI back to the business is when we turn some things off. Now, again, and I'm hogging the limelight, just a couple of things about that. It's one thing to get your partners to turn infrastructure off. Luckily enough, we're able to do that through our contract. The real big cultural change was our development teams wanted to keep both. So they wanted to go to the cloud, but they equally wanted to keep their on-premise infrastructure available because they weren't quite sure about the cloud. So for us, getting the true economic benefits about bringing those two together.
So Ryan, you showed optimization in your chart. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of the, when we started in central IT at Harvard, we had a very granular recharge system already in place. So it actually made it very easy. We had lots of good data to be able to do the analysis and kind of compare that against Amazon costs and actually show a really strong ROI on that case. I think kind of the other part of that, though, is I think kind of you have to be careful about those assumptions, and I think this goes on the investment. I think there's both the investment in terms of kind of the project and the people and the timing and all of that, but the other thing is I think if you remember that chart kind of, and I've seen this in several places, where you start off of it's hard to do a lot of optimization earlier because you're just still figuring out how do you run the stuff in the first place. And so I think it will take you a little bit of time in order to get your heads around kind of like, what do we do this? What do we need? Where are we trying to run this? And then you can kind of go down. So I would plan on a little bit of a bubble. I think the ROI is still very compelling and very strong, but there is likely to be a bubble. There's also some really simple things that you can do that kind of, if you look around, there's a couple of things that will kind of eat up hidden costs very easily that you can take care of without a huge amount of effort, just using spreadsheets, just using some of the tools that Amazon has. And so I think kind of look to do that as well as you can go along. And then there's lots of vendors who help with that optimization as well. But I think kind of plan for a little bit of a bubble, but I think you're absolutely going to find the return on there, especially if you can tie it to something like, I'm going to shut down this data center, or I have this particular business project that sort of, I've got this much time to deliver it in, and if I do it on premise, it'll take that long. So look for those specific value cases again.
We're a little bit of a different model as a service provider. So when we bring a new institution on board with us, we actually stand up their own VPC. So we're actually able to scale and scope and size those based on each institution's needs. So from a cost perspective, our business model, I don't even think it would be possible to do it if we were to build out our own infrastructure somewhere without a cloud environment. So it's a little bit different than maybe what some of you might be after, but the model for us works quite well from a cost perspective.
Excellent. I think we're wrapping up on our, do we have a quick one?
Yeah, it would seem that looking at the economics, just disaster recovery has to justify it on an economic basis. You either don't have adequate disaster recovery before you go to the cloud, or you have very expensive disaster recovery before you go to the cloud. So which was it for you?
Ours was very expensive, inadequate disaster recovery. And we found that out recently in terms of, had a couple of major outages. We basically, instead of using DR to go back to our on-premise solution, we accelerated the cloud program. So you are right, there will be, it's interesting about, because we're the managed service, the way in which we helped to sell the economic argument was about acknowledging that under our contracts, that money was sunk anyway. So we were going to spend it whether we did nothing or not. So one of the really good slides about we started to engage with the CFO to start to take a 1 to 3 year return about how we could shift money that was going from point A to point B. DR was an example about that.
Yeah, I think kind of for us, and I'm sure this will resonate with many people, we had what I would call checkbox DR. You know, we could check the box that yes, we had DR, we had stuff here off-site, and we had procedures that we went through. You know, the reality of it is, you know, when a real disaster strikes, you're not going to have had, you know, a 3-month planning project and sort of teams there and sort of, you know, shipping CDs to some location. So I think kind of absolutely it's a lot easier. And I think in some ways the other thing that you can really get at is not just DR for mission critical applications, but it's really easy to sort of introduce a lot more resiliency into kind of other applications that you never would have had DR for before, but that provides a lot of value to your organization as well.
That would include that and the kind of thing that we did not want to have to create ourselves, right? That we would rather partner with best of breed, and that's how we provided that.
Well, I'm getting the flashing red dot. We're done, but please feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to talk, and thank you for staying.